welcome to the program. I'm Min Sun-hee, and as always, on set is our group of foreign correspondents. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be back.
Now, up until the first week of January, the weather was quite mild, but in recent days, temperatures have plunged dramatically, if I may say so. And speaking of the weather, are there any differences in scenery during the winter between Korea and your respective countries? For instance, in Korea during the winter, we have a large number of street vendors selling roasted chestnuts, fish cake, and fish cake soup. Marcus?
We have street vendors in Scandinavia as well when it gets cold. So they'll sell hot cocoa or the hot mulled wines. I do prefer the winter here in Korea from the winters in Scandinavia that I'm used to, because back home it's darker. It'll get dark around 3 p.m. It'll start getting dark, and it will constantly rain and snow, so alternate between rain and snow, and then the snow will thaw and then it will freeze again.
I'm from Vancouver. It's the mildest place in Canada. I think it's similar to what Marcus was just describing. We get that alternating sort of slushy weather where it snows maybe for a period of time, a couple of weeks. Usually each winter we'll get some snow, and then that slush on the streets will stay for, it seems like forever, getting your shoes dirty every time you want to go out. And we do get a lot of rain. Vancouver's in a rainforest, so it does get a lot of rain over the winter too.
It's quite a wet winter then. What's it like in the US?
So it depends where in the US we're talking about. I grew up in Texas where there is no winter, so we'd be swimming at the pools right now. And then in Washington, it's on the same line of latitude as Seoul, so the climate is very similar.
Right. Former US President Barack Obama gave his farewell speech on January 10th in Chicago, the city where he launched his political career. The speech came prior to his departure on the 20th, marking an end to 8 years of service at the White House. We have details in our first report. The 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama. After 8 years in office, he has wrapped up his term.
Every day, I learned from you. You made me a better president, and you made me a better man.
Are you prepared to take the oath, Senator?
I am. So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
In January 2009, Obama became the first African-American president in the United States.
The challenges we face are real. They are serious and they are many. They will not be met easily or in a short span of time. But know this, America, they will be met.
And he was re-elected in 2012. And until January this year, Obama is seen as having made great efforts to keep his campaign pledges while dealing with issues at hand. Having maintained a corruption and scandal-free image, Obama still had an approval rating of 57% back in November.
In fact, I will be right there with you as a citizen for all my remaining days.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we did. Yes, we can.
As his retirement drew near, there was an outpour of news coverage from around the world looking back on the achievements made by President Obama. The Obama era is now over, giving way to a new presidency under Donald Trump. Much attention will be on what kind of legacy President Trump begins to build as he takes office. Right, now I would like a very short response to this first question. Marcus, what kind of president was Barack Obama in your opinion?
Well, I think if you ask the American people, I think he's going to be remembered for what he did to help the economy in a very critical period of time right after the financial crisis. And I think if you ask people around the world, In the long run, I think Obama might be remembered for being in the White House in a period of time where the global balance of power really started to shift, and you saw that happening a lot faster than what we've seen in the past.
Right. Elise, what about you?
I think history will remember him well as a president. He came into office after George W. Bush had to leave in disgrace and had to write a lot of different things. One, America's place in the world, which has now been restored a lot since Bush. And then the other was the economy, which was in dire straits. And so on both those areas, I think his legacy will be strong. Obviously, there's been left open many open questions as he leaves, but this is global disruption that we are going to face.
Yeah, I think I have a positive feeling about Obama. I think he was a very symbolic president for the United States. I think the sort of arc of the U.S. influence around the world is waning, and one president is not going to change that. And he may have, in a way, ushered in an era in which the United States can accept a more multipolar world in terms of organizing international relations that is something that needs to be embraced as we move forward as an international community, sure.
Right. On quite a few occasions, Mr. Obama, although largely considered a dispassionate politician, chose to share with his people a more humane side. I believe he shed tears a total of 9 separate occasions during his 8 years in office.
For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend.
Marcus, what kind of man was Barack Obama then?
What I noticed pretty early, I think, in his presidency was that he was a very funny guy in a lot of ways, I think, which I think says a lot about his personality. He would tell jokes in a way that you rarely see politicians do. So I know that he had a lot of help in preparing his speeches and his jokes when he would go on talk shows and whatever. But so every year there's a dinner at the White House for the White House correspondents, and so that's a tradition. But Barack Obama took that tradition to a whole new level and was really, really funny.
And that's why I invited Luther, my anger translator, to join me here tonight. But we do need to stay focused on some big challenges, like climate change.
Hey, listen, y'all, if you haven't noticed, California is bone dry. It looked like a trailer for the new Mad Max movie up in there.
He was also rhetorically very, very gifted. Some of the speeches he made, I would argue, was in the very top of the best presidential speeches ever made. So that's sort of one thing I noticed very early, I think, about Barack Obama was his presence and the way he was able to deliver speeches.
A day after Mr. Obama delivered his farewell speech in Chicago, President Trump held a press conference which was quite intense because he refused to allow a CNN reporter to verify his media organization's report on Mr. Trump's ties to Russia. In contrast, how would you assess Mr. Obama's relationship with the media?
I interviewed him in 2008 and have covered him since in various spurts. I would say the White House respects the free press.
Essential to that is a free press. That is part of how this place, this country, this grand experiment in self-government has to work.
They are an extremely controlled White House in that they want their message out. If there are stories that they don't like, they will call the reporter the day after and sort of question that. But Obama and the White House in general have always provided access and allowed for a certain amount of access, such as a protective pool in which wherever the president goes publicly or even privately, there is a pool reporter assigned to him. And all of these traditions have always been preserved in American sort of press and democracy, and they are getting slowly whittled away by the Trump administration. And so now there's even talk that the Trump administration will move the White House press away from the White House itself, which would be an unprecedented move. Yes, the Obama White House was more controlled than previous administrations, for instance, the Clinton administration. But did it respect the free press enough to allow for norms? It did. What we are facing with Trump is an unprecedented level of sort of authoritarianism and disdain for the free press that is really worrying.
Mr. Obama came into office with a message of hope and change. His farewell address also included the words, "Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can." Now, in this next report, we take a look at his accomplishments while in office.
The sacred stone.
After being sworn into office as the President of the United States, Barack Obama made various attempts to create change and reform. Getting the U.S. economy back on track is considered his greatest achievement. When Obama assumed office in January 2009, the U.S. economy was at rock bottom. But over the last 8 years, the Obama administration has revived the American economy. The unemployment rate has dropped from 7.8% to 4.7%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average has more than doubled during his term. But some media outlets were more critical of Obama's economic achievements. CBS News referred to Obama's 8 years of economic growth as solid but unspectacular. Financial news service MarketWatch said his economic legacy falls in the middle of the pack when looking through the lens of past presidencies. Another major achievement is the hallmark legislation, the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. Signed into law in March 2010, Obamacare aims to help uninsured low-income Americans enroll in health insurance plans, while providing subsidies to the middle class to reduce their economic burden. According to the White House, the uninsured rate has dropped from 16% in 2010 to 8.9% in 2016 under Obamacare. Also on Obama's list of accomplishments are securing a nuclear agreement with Iran after 36 years of severed diplomatic relations, and being the first U.S. leader to visit Cuba in 88 years, bringing down a wall from the Cold War between the two nations.
I have come here to bury the last remnant of the Cold War in the Americas.
Not only that, the ratification of the Paris Agreement on climate change is also seen as a major legacy of the Obama administration. Let's talk about his progress on the economic front then. Marcus, we'll start with you. What are some of his more notable achievements?
Well, he cut unemployment in half during his terms in office. The American people will remember him for. They do these polls every year in the U.S. where they ask a lot of people from all walks of life about how they feel about their personal financial situation, about their outlook on life. And when they did these polls at the end of Obama's administration, the results were a lot more positive than they were at the beginning, significantly more positive. So people were more optimistic about their financial situation, about their future in the job market.
Some claim that the US economy had hit rock bottom as Mr. Obama came into office, and therefore the only way was to go back up again. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to have to agree with that statement. I think it's very hard to evaluate cause and effect and success and failure when you're working in such short time spans and dealing with such a large economy and so many other influences on the economy other than decisions or policies made by the president. Looking particularly at the auto bailout, you know, a question might be what's going to happen the next time the auto industry gets into that kind of trouble and comes to the government again for another handout. It encourages that type of behavior again. I understand it had a tremendous impact. At the time, I was certainly against that type of bailout. And, you know, to evaluate the success and failure, it would be nice if we had a much longer time span to look at, okay, what's going to happen in the auto industry in the United States in the next 20 years? Is it really on that strong a footing? Have they changed their sort of business practices to be more responsible?
I think that that's one part of the Obama legacy. I would actually shift this conversation to more progress on social issues and social justice. You know, this is the time period in which we saw LGBT rights affirmed in the United States. Gay marriage was allowed, and then 20 million more people got health insurance. These are things that are progressive priorities that are also humane, which without a lot of the work of the administration, coupled with the leadership in Congress, would not have happened.
Right. Despite its merit, President Trump has frequently spoken of plans to repeal and replace Obamacare. Elise, do you suppose this will be possible during his administration?
Congress has already started the process of repeal. So both the House and the Senate in the U.S. have voted to repeal. However, the tough part is not that. The tough part is replacing, because how do you take all these people, sick people, who are now currently covered, off of coverage? I mean, there's actually a lot of coverage now of Americans basically saying they will die without health insurance.
Because we're talking about 20 million, is it?
At least. And then the other provision of the Affordable Care Act that was such a big deal was that it forced insurance companies to cover those with pre-existing conditions. And so in the private market, insurers have no incentive to cover you if you already have cancer, for example. But because of these government mechanisms, they forced you to cover them. A repeal would mean insurance companies it would be the Wild West again. They could essentially just say, sorry, you're too expensive, I'm not going to cover you, which really is a life and death situation.
I think of it as 2 steps forward and likely 1 step back, especially in terms of social welfare in the United States. And what Obama might have brought along, even if it is repealed by Trump, is a change in the philosophy of Americans. That, maybe we should reconsider how we're organizing our social welfare infrastructure and the health care that's provided to all Americans, and look at other models, even if Trump does succeed in repealing it, looking forward to perhaps, a resurged Democratic Party in the future. There might be planted an idea in the American psyche that we need to take another look at this in the future.
Now, despite the advances in the economic front, Mr. Obama did not score high in the field of foreign policy, according to some media organizations that point to, among other issues, the continued standoff on the Korean Peninsula as proof. This is precisely why much attention is focused on the Trump administration's diplomatic agenda. While Obama has been praised for producing remarkable results in economic and social policies, when it comes to foreign policy and national security, some point out much more could have been done. In 2009, Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize just about 10 months into his presidency for his vision of nuclear non-proliferation and creating a new climate in international relations. Despite this honor, he was unable to stop nuclear tests conducted by North Korea. Out of Pyongyang's 5 nuclear tests, 4 were carried under the Obama administration. Amid this, key positions within Trump's cabinet are likely to be filled with hardliners who have underlined the threat from Pyongyang. This is expected to lead to an aggressive stance from Washington on North Korea policy.
North Korea, too, has dangerously accelerated its nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities.
Meanwhile, results from Obama's Pivot to Asia initiative to deter China's growing influence are also questionable. While China has strengthened ties with Russia, some say in comparison, US influence has waned. Trump has already signaled he will take a head-on approach with China in the world of diplomacy. He claims he will push Beijing to cooperate in imposing sanctions on North Korea and moderate China's activities in the South China Sea.
We should also acknowledge the realities about China. China's island building in the South China Sea is an illegal taking of disputed areas without regard for international norms.
The threats of extremist Islamic groups such as IS and the Syrian civil war have also been left for the Trump administration to deal with. The Trump administration is expected to take a very different path from that of the Obama administration, which is why countries around the world will be closely watching developments from Washington under its new leadership. Now, we'll delve now into some of his less impressive records. Marcus, what in your opinion was one perhaps of his failures?
Well, he failed, I think it's safe to say, with his pivot to Asia, with his efforts to try to strengthen U.S. ties with its allies in East Asia. There's a lot of good reasons why that didn't play out how the administration was hoping it would. He had to focus on other foreign issues, security issues. There was the Ukraine, Syria, the relationship with Russia and others. But that was sort of a strategy, a long-term strategy of the Obama administration that just didn't work out the way they hoped it would. They lost key allies in the region, with the Philippines now saying they might ask the U.S. troops in the country to leave, a more assertive China, the conflicts in the South China Sea.
I don't know. I think the pivot to Asia, I would view it more as mixed. The Philippines there were reasons that Rodrigo Duterte, who is the Filipino leader, rose, and a lot of that was domestic politics. The rebalance to Asia in terms of Southeast Asia is very strong. I covered Obama both in Malaysia and in Laos. ASEAN nations are huge fans of what America has done sort of in those regions to spur some more investment and to help the young people there. There's the Yesali initiative that the Obama State Department started to help young leaders in Southeast Asia. The relationship with Japan is as strong as it has ever been. I mean, this past year, we saw the visit to Hiroshima by President Obama, and then the bookend visit by Shinzo Abe to Pearl Harbor. So the relationship with Japan is rather strong. The relationship with Korea seems unchanged. South Korea seems unchanged. There's a lot of talk among UN folks that it remains ironclad and all of that. So those areas, I think, are pluses because of a lot of attention paid to Southeast Asia and the traditional allies of Japan and Korea, Japan being sort of the most important ally there. But I would say Obama's biggest foreign policy failure is in Syria, of course. The bloodshed and the civil war in Syria, failing to work with Russia to come up with any sort of resolution to the massive civilian deaths that were happening and the loss of Aleppo just months ago.
Going back to North Korea, why do you suppose he was unable to rein in the reclusive regime's provocations?
I think Obama from the get-go was interested in establishing a real dialogue with China. He wanted to deepen the relationship with China, and that's why he had to take a somewhat soft approach to the North Korean issue. That's one reason, I think. But I don't think you could argue that he's been soft throughout his 2 terms in office. I mean, he did help to impose multilateral sanctions on North Korea recently, so I think that's nuanced.
Right. Now, President Trump has vowed to take a stronger stance against North Korea's nuclear ambitions. He went as far as denouncing China's perhaps inability to do more to ensure regional peace and stability. What changes can we expect to see under the Trump administration with regard to foreign policy?
I think if we compare his comments about North Korea to some of the other comments that he's made, he's sort of feeling out the ground there, maybe staking out some territory from which to negotiate. And it's not that extreme territory, and there's really not much that he can do as president to rein in North Korea or put more pressure on China. It's not an issue that the American president has a lot of impact on, especially if it's plans on continuing that same policy of sanctions and pressure on North Korea. That's a proven failure over the entire Obama administration. The policy of strategic patience, which was actually abandoned, midway through Obama's administration, has proven a failure. Trump has shown no inclination to move away from that, and as long as that's the case, I don't think he has much really policy movement. It's really in China's court.
Right. There are views that Mr. Obama will remain in politics even outside the White House. What do you see Mr. Obama is doing now that he has returned as a citizen of the U.S.?
Well, he's already said that he's going to focus on redistricting. So redistricting is the process of Congress drawing the areas in which you vote. And this is the reason why Republicans have traditionally had more political power in the legislature in the United States, despite having fewer voters in the popular, in the nation overall. And so this is a process that's drawn every 10 years based on the census. And it seems like an arcane or parochial issue, but redistricting is really critical to political power in the legislature.
Right. Mr. Obama once claimed that his job as president was not to represent Washington to the people, but to represent the people to Washington. Now, it may be difficult to assess whether or not he was a good leader, but it is easy to see that he did seek to speak on behalf of his people. Thank you for watching.